only grown by an absolute number of just 10% over the last 10 years.
Coffee farmers are actually more inclined to sell beans off to cafe brand, etc. We don't use Starbucks for this episode because their coffee is shit.
The problem with the offices is that the HR managers don't have the budget to get you higher coffee.
In terms of acquisition, there's a very interesting thing that the cafe brands have done. In today's episode, we're going to discuss 3 key things about the Indian coffee market. First, decoding the Indian coffee market itself and different consumption insights of the Indian coffee consumer. Second, playbooks of different cafe startups in India, some of the most successful, which have been Third Wave, Blue Tokai, etc. And the last is strategies to build a D2C coffee brand in India. So we'll be looking at everything coffee in this episode. Make sure you stay till the end. Let's perspectivify the shit out of this.
So, if you look at the Indian coffee market, what you'll realize is that you can divide it into 2 parts. The first part is domestic and the second part is international. So, if we focus purely on domestic consumption of coffee, what you'll realize is that 95% of it actually belongs to instant or commercial coffee, right? And only 5% belongs to specialty coffee. But that 5% is growing relatively fast now because it's primarily being consumed by urban consumers and all of those things, right? Now, if you really dig deep into the domestic consumption of coffee, what you'll realize, Dhruv, is that it's only grown by an absolute number of just 10% over the last 10 years, right? And the reason for that is that India is primarily a tea market and not a coffee market. So the absolute consumption is not really increasing as fast as you would like, right? As a result, even though we have like amazing Arabica coffee, we have amazing Robusta coffee, India basically exports all of it, which makes me move to the second part of the Indian coffee landscape, and that is international. The total Indian export is approximately $1.28 billion as compared to $720 million of coffee exports in FY 2021. But on a fundamental level, if you think about where global coffee consumption is and where Indian coffee consumption is, so if you look at North America, Europe, global and the global average, India is much below that. So North America per capita coffee consumption is approximately 5.1 kgs. Europe mein it is approximately 4.5 kgs. The global average is around 1.3 kgs, but India mein it is just 0.07 kg per capita, and I'm specifically talking about per capita coffee consumption, right? So while the macroeconomics of this industry look a bit tough, right? Because coffee consumption isn't that much, majority of it is exported, right? So if this is what I feel, that if you're really passionate about coffee, only then you should start in either 2 ways. Number 1 is you can either start your own cafe, and we'll talk about it in a bit, or you can start your own D2C brand like Sleepy Owl and all the other amazing brands out there.
I think it's pretty crazy that the absolute increase in the domestic consumption is just 10%.
Yeah.
So coming to the next segment, which is consumer demographics, and me and Rakshit personally studied a lot of reports from the Coffee Board. Especially, there's a very interesting, beautiful report on the state of the entire Indian coffee consumption market, which allowed us to derive some of these statistics, which I'm just going to tell you in a moment's time. Now the first is that let's think of the persona of average Indian coffee consumer. Now the first thing is that the most common age bracket happens to be the 25 to 35 age bracket, which is roughly the tipping point of, let's say, Gen Zs and millennials, somewhere in that category. At home coffee consumption currently far outpaces out of home coffee consumption, which again indicates back to the fact that people are consuming more instant coffee because, again, it's just easier to make at home. So seems like at home coffee consumption is far ahead. That's, however, not to say that out of home coffee consumption is not improving or increasing. In fact, if nothing, it's actually probably because it's a much smaller share, it has much more potential for growth, which is why you're seeing these brands like Third Wave, Blue Tokai probably scaling fairly well over the last couple of years.
Also,
Right.
one more factor to consider over here is that the ARPU that you can essentially generate. So while the absolute number might be low, but if you combine that with like a much higher ARPU than an instant coffee, you look at
Yeah.
the market dynamics would be different for sure.
True. Yeah. So that's those are some of the things. Also, hot coffee is the more preferred form of coffee, which I personally was happy to hear. Because I personally like hot coffee.
Okay.
There's a lot of people who really love cold brews.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you're one of
Yeah,
them.
I'm one of them.
So yeah. So seems like hot is still the preferred form. Oh yeah, and yeah, taste is the driving factor for Indian coffee
Yeah.
drinkers, which, as we just discussed, is something that determines largely why people are drinking or not drinking. And brands that can deliver this obviously have have a distinct edge over other competitors, right? And the final thing is that if you're building a coffee brand in India, urban areas consume 4x more than rural areas. So obviously it makes sense to go for a tier 1 city if you're planning to start out any of these coffee brands.
Yeah.
And there's also more factors alongside it. For instance, if I maybe come to regional insights, a very obvious point would be that southern states happen to be the primary coffee producing regions. So you have states like Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu contributing to 97% of India's coffee. So almost all of India's
Yeah.
coffee is coming from southern states. Karnataka alone, in fact, contributes 71% by itself,
Yeah.
which means that if you can maybe build your brand in the vicinity of these areas, your supply chain life cycle might be much shorter.
Yeah.
So it might be easier for you to procure, talk to farmers, etc., if you're building out in the south side,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. One thing to note over here is that as I just said, that 90% of all Arabica beans and 70% of all Robusta beans are actually exported outside India, right? So the
Right.
cost, so even though a majority of production happens in India with respect to coffee, but you might have to pay a premium to get that in India, to get the same quality in
Correct.
India.
And yeah, because there's a lot more production happening on the south side, the awareness for coffee is also much higher in the south. So south seems to be one of the easier areas to start a coffee brand. But again,
But
there's
that's
that
filter coffee.
there's another. Probably yes, but there's another catch with that hypothesis, which is that if everyone starts producing, just starts getting brands in the south, there's a lot more opportunity to be explored in the north. So it's not to say that north is not at all, there up there in that ranking. Because, for instance, Blue Tokai happens to be one of those few coffee brands that started in Delhi
Gurgaon.
itself.
Yeah.
And it seems to be doing fairly well. So it's not to say that south is the only way to go. I think it really depends on your outlook.
Yeah.
Right. So with that out of the way, now we can come to how can you start your own coffee brand, and we start with how can you start your own cafe. So there's cafe and there's D2C. So we first come to the cafe side of things. Now, largely the two more successful coffee startups in India have been Third Wave and Blue Tokai. At least that have penetrated the cafe playbook fairly well. So let's start with the first one, which is Third Wave. Now, Third Wave is way more dominant in the Bangalore side. Reason being, again, they started in Bangalore for ease of access for the large coffee market. So I don't think Third Wave is that popular in Delhi or Gurgaon.
Yeah, it's
because
not.
I
It's
think
not. It's not.
I think I personally go to a lot more Third Waves in Bangalore. So I think for Delhi and Gurgaon, it's more Blue Tokai. So that's also a very common thing which I've observed, which is that wherever you start a brand, I think it automatically becomes more popular in that particular city.
Yeah.
It's an obvious thing also. Coming to the next set of things. So largely the way the whole cafe market functions is that you decide your location, which we already discussed. How can you probably decide your location?
Hmm.
B is the sourcing strategy, right? Like how do you go about sourcing the right beans?
Hmm.
Now, in most cases, at least with the
Hmm.
with brands like Third Wave and Blue Tokai,
Hmm.
these have been very adept at finding the right farmers and ensuring the best beans, right? Often, I mean, from whatever I have researched personally, is that people just go out, find contacts in the network of these farmers, fly down, have a conversation with them that I want to procure your beans, and if the farmer is okay with that, then it's a pretty simple relationship that builds out.
This is probably the most important part of like any coffee brand, right? Because you want to give quality. Because if you want to get like a wallet share from the urban consumers, you need to give them quality material, right? If you're charging that kind of a
Precisely.
price, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And another interesting thing is, from what I learned while researching on this episode, was that coffee farmers are actually more inclined to sell beans off to brands, I mean cafe brands, etc., simply because the commodity market prices are not as good. So they might as well deal with these big brands where you get better prices, right? So it's
Acha.
not that it's very difficult to penetrate and it's very difficult to convince
Hmm.
the farmers. In fact, they're more than happy ki we have a new partner where you can get more income, right?
Hmm.
So that's also very interesting insight I didn't personally know.
Interesting.
So now coming to the acquisition and retention strategy, specifically for Third Wave, right? I think one of the biggest wins so far, I don't know if you've been a user of Third Wave a lot, but I personally used to use Third Wave like very, very frequently, I think up till a few years back. And their rewards program uh, is very well made, right? And I think for some reason, I don't know why Blue Tokai doesn't have much of a reward program.
Yeah.
I don't know why that's the case,
Yeah.
but it seems like Third Wave has cracked that really well. And I think one interesting thing while I was listening to one of the podcasts from Third Wave founder itself was that they found this very interesting insight, which is that on the Third Wave app. So now this Third Wave app is pretty simple. You use the Third Wave app every time you're going out for a coffee for a coffee at Third Wave. You get points. It's like a pretty simple reward point system. You can redeem the points on and off for a free coffee or a lot of savings on your overall coffee purchase. Now, the co-founder, while studying some of the data, realized that people want a seamless experience. They don't want to they don't want to stand in lines every time and decide which coffee. Like a lot of the people who are just having coffee before their office, they already know they want to have a cappuccino every single day. They don't want to change their coffee kind of type also. So a very simple way that the brand made a very seamless experience here is through a coffee pack. Now, what they did was that on their app, they actually gave options to consumers saying that I'm giving you an option to buy 15 cups of coffee, 15 cups of cappuccino, or 15 cups of, Americano. And what you can just do is you come to the counter, you swipe it, you swipe your QR code, and that's all. You don't have to do anything else. You don't have to tell the vendor what to buy, etc., etc. So it's a very simple experience, and you actually get, I think, a little bit of discount also on the overall pack. So you can just buy these packs. So it's super fast, and you can just buy a coffee on the go, right? So that seemed like an interesting thing. Again, reducing the friction in the whole process. Something I've not seen a lot of other brands really do.
Yeah.
Probably I'm assuming Starbucks must be having some of these things.
Although is
But again,
Starbucks
we didn't use Starbucks for this episode because their coffee is shit. I'm sorry.
but like let's leave that aside, but because I actually go to Starbucks relatively more than I go to Third Wave or
Okay.
Blue Tokai.
But is the coffee actually good? It's not good,
Look,
man. Like, come on.
their black coffee is pretty good, and their
Okay.
what do you call,
There's a
cold
vanilla
brew.
latte or something.
I'm not big proponent of flavored coffees, even though we
Okay,
will
okay.
talk about it. I prefer cold brew, and the cold brew
Right.
is pretty
It's
good.
good.
It's pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe in Delhi in certain branches, but I've never had good coffee
Yeah.
at Starbucks, so I don't know. So yeah, in terms of acquisition and retention, sorry, not acquisition maybe, but retention for sure. The coffee pack idea and the overall app idea for
Mhm.
Threadwave makes absolute
Yeah.
sense. In terms of acquisition, there's a very interesting thing that the cafe brands have done. I wasn't very well aware of this before this episode, although I think Rakshit already knew about this. But some of the cafe brands actually partnered with certain bookstores. So, one instance, Third Wave Coffee partnered with multiple crossword bookstores to make a collaborative experience of coffee plus reading. Makes a lot of sense.
Plus, you get like
And
almost free real estate, right? You don't have to
yeah,
spend on real estate, so that's a big
correct.
win for
True.
for these people.
Or I'm assuming that if it's a partnership, perhaps you'd be sharing the costs or
Yeah,
something
I
like that.
mean,
Not quite sure how
or
it
you
works
could
out,
be
but
just sharing like a part of your revenue, so 1 or 2%
true.
or 5% of sales.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So super smart collaboration strategy seamlessly, mixes the experience of reading with coffee. And I think it's not just Third Wave. Blue Tokai also did this with Crossword itself.
Yeah.
So it's odd that Crossword would partner with multiple brands, but either way works very well for these cafe brands.
Yeah.
And the last thing I think I would want to touch upon very briefly is that there have been a lot of challenges in scaling um, cafe brands in India at this point in time. We already discussed the fact that domestic consumption has been very slow the last couple of years. In fact, third wave sales had a major slump also to almost 67% growth from 355% growth in the previous period.
Yeah.
So there's a major slowdown in consumer discretionary spending, and it seems like it's becoming increasingly hard to convince price sensitive consumers to pay probably a little higher for specialty premium coffee. So that remains a major challenge in India at this point in time. Let's come to the Blue Tokai playbook next. Now, Blue Tokai was founded in New Delhi. Again, one of the more odd brands, because this is not like a common thing. A lot of brands mostly start in the south side. So interestingly, again, now the way they particularly scaled, and I had to listen to a few podcasts from Matt, who's their co-founder. A lot of interesting insights on how this actually functions. Now, some of the learnings from what Matt spoke about in a few of his own podcast episodes was that it's incredibly hard to open up just a single location in different cities. Like, one of the naive approaches to building out cafes in multiple cities would be that, oh, let me just create like one outlet in multiple cities, so I've tapped all the cities and now I'll start growing there, right? It's like it makes a lot of sense in a naive person's head, right? But the problem is that, again, it's very difficult to devote a lot of resources and build multiple locations, because again, every location would have their own kind of user personas. Like, even in India, it's not to say that every persona is the same in every state, right? So one is that it's not just very easy to just start a location in some city and say that now it's just going to grow. There's a lot more that goes in the process. So it's always easier or always better to go into a few key locations, understand the market better, and penetrate those cities way better, rather than trying to open up too many stores in too many cities at the same time, right? Because of the sort of lack of focus that comes into that, right?
So, are you saying that you should have, let's say, 2 or 3 stores in one city, and anyways, because of food delivery networks, now they're serving almost all the pin codes, at least in the urban areas. You can essentially cover the entire city through
Yes.
food delivery. And if it's a good coffee, people, at least in urban areas, at least in Gurgaon, people don't mind traveling a little bit to get a cup of coffee or just to explore a new restaurant.
Correct. So yeah, all I'm saying is that again, it's better to focus on a few key cities. Also because like when you're a founder, when you want to make sure that the quality is sustained across multiple
Mm-hmm.
locations, what will have to happen is then you have to fly down every single time to different locations to test how it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And usually what tends to happen in this line of business is that wherever the founder is, there the quality etc. will be
Yeah,
maintained very well
yeah.
because the founder will come in at any time, see how the coffee is, etc. But you can't keep flying down to different locations over and over again and see how things going there,
Yeah,
right? So very hard to do that. Better to choose a few cities. Again, metros seem to be the go-to in this
yeah,
case,
yeah,
at least for the out-of-home coffee consumption experience.
yeah.
And one more thing that was interest that an interesting thing that did come up was that it's better to actually just open up a large cafe rather than trying to operate like a small kiosk, or like a
Hmm.
very small outlet in any area. Because what happens is, again, so you have to train the staff, you have to put in your investment in terms of procuring the beans, you have to establish the whole supply chain. So it's much better, so it's like doing the whole thing for a much smaller outlet, right?
Hmm.
But rather it makes more sense to just, if you are building it out, build out a bigger space, a proper store, than trying to just operate a small kiosk just to satisfy a few consumers in a particular region.
That's a very counterintuitive insight, is what I would say.
It is, but if you think of it in a sense that, see, you have to build a supply chain to a particular location,
Hmm.
right? You have to train, how much ever staff you're procuring. For every, even a kiosk or a cafe, you'll have to have maybe two or three people manning the store. So
Mm-hmm.
you have to do all the effort, but your area is much smaller. There's not a lot of space for consumers to sit and relax. So automatically, the consumption is also not higher in that
Hmm.
place. So it actually makes a lot more sense to go all in on a bigger store rather than trying to open small stores everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Got it.
and if you also think about it, like, I think all of us prefer like a big space experience rather than sitting in like a tight congested place,
Hmm.
right?
Makes
I
sense.
don't think anybody likes that,
Makes sense.
right?
Makes sense. Makes sense.
So the way Blue Tokai differentiates itself, at least in terms of marketing, is that obviously there's not a lot of digital advertising for any of these brands going on. But what Blue Tokai would do back in the day was that they would attend a lot of these on-ground farmer pop-ups, or like a lot of on-ground events where they could connect with a lot of farmers, connect with a lot of people in the coffee space, market themselves, tell them to come down to their store. So that seemed one of the initial ways to grow.
Yeah.
And one thing that Blue Toka has done very differently is that they worked a lot on their B2B business,
Hmm.
right? So they have, what they've managed to crack is going to a lot of these companies, convincing them that, boss, I'm going to give your employees a much better coffee experience. I'm going to give you beans every single day. I'll give you the, coffee setup, etc. So your employees are going to have a much better coffee experience. And me
Yeah.
and Akshay know that office coffee has been
Yeah.
shit
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
in any company you work at, pretty much.
Yeah.
So lucky for partners like Amazon, Google, Paytm, Facebook, etc. So these are the partners that
Yeah.
Blue Tokai managed to rope in. And also what happens here is that because there's a sustained partnership, you have a steady stream of income coming through,
Yeah.
right? And you can build out a great supply chain toward to this company. So you have like, coffee going there, you getting the income. So it's a lot easier, and again, it creates a steady income stream. So I think that's what Blue Tokai has managed to crack, which is which something third wave caught on much later. I think third wave also was not into a lot of D2C, kind of selling for their own coffee beans. But Blue Tokai started out much faster with that. And I think
Yeah.
the beans actually became more popular,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
at least on quick commerce and other platforms.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Talking briefly about their B2B strategy with offices, right? The problem with the offices is that the HR managers don't have the budget to get you higher coffee. So,
True.
yeah, so if the budget is, let's say, 13 rupees or 13 rupees per kgs, you won't get good coffee in that, right? You'll get some chicory mixed coffee in that budget, right? So, as you said, their clients are Amazon, Google, Meta. So these guys have the money
Yeah, and big,
to
yeah,
these are
exactly,
big
big
players.
brands, right?
But I don't think you can
Correct.
scale it beyond these big players. Personal
Probably,
opinion.
yeah, probably.
Personal opinion.
Of course.
So now coming on to the next part, which is uh, starting your own D2C brand in India, right? So for that, we need to look at a few data points first. Let's first look at the 2010 coffee consumption by volume breakup on the type of coffee consumed. So Dhruv, I'll ask you this
Hmm.
question. What
Okay.
was the breakup, according to you,
Hmm.
between
Hmm.
instant coffee and
Okay.
ground filter coffee?
Instant and ground
In
coffee.
2010. In
I,
2010.
I think definitely the filter coffee would be much higher.
Yeah, so you're actually right. So almost
Yeah.
82% of all coffee consumption was actually filter or ground coffee, and only
Okay.
18% was actually instant coffee.
Okay.
Do you know what that number was in 2022?
I'm assuming it should be in the same range, or perhaps instant coffee has gone up a bit.
So instant coffee has gone up by approximately 65%, 66% now, and only 33% is actually filter coffee. So there actually,
Okay.
because the coffee consumption hasn't grown in India, what you'll realize is
Hmm.
that they have actually taken over the entire coffee.
Transition into
Yeah, Indian
okay instant
consumers
coffee.
have transitioned into instant coffee. And we have, like,
Hmm.
throughout this episode, we have spoken about that majority of the coffee consumption, at least in India, is, at home coffee consumption. But just to put numbers to that,
Right.
approximately 93 to 94% of coffee consumption in India is actually at home coffee consumption, and only 5 to 6%, 7% is actually outside, right?
Contributor has also been COVID in all this process. Like it's maybe shifted the whole coffee experience to because of the whole work from
You
home
you might
phenomenon
be
that
right. You
came
might be right
that
because
came
yeah,
yeah
yeah, you might be right because in
um
2015, I'm looking at the numbers right now. In
yeah
2015, it was instant coffee was 36%, and
okay. So
filter or
again
ground
filter
coffee
coffee
is
was still much higher,
64%.
right?
And
I think
yeah,
वही है वो कोविड ने आके
yeah.
सब
In
तहस
2020,
महस
it
कर दिया है.
shifted. It in 2020 it shifted to 57% and 43%. Yeah, you might
Yeah.
be right about that. You might
So
be right
the
about
whole work from home phenomenon, I think people working from home
that.
and
Yeah,
they just want quick coffee.
yeah,
They don't have time. I
yeah.
I, I just feel like that's the case. Like people just don't have time anymore,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
They just want instant coffee.
Yeah, and
So
majority of it is urban, right? So urban
yeah,
mein
yeah,
to that makes complete sense, right?
right.
But the problem with the current instant coffee, is that it is right now a blend of Robusta and Chicory, which are
Mm-hmm.
basically considered to be slightly inferior. So if you've had Arabica, it's very
Mm-hmm.
hard to go back to Robusta or to Chicory,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But currently, that's what the major players are doing, like Nestle and Brew, right? So they contribute almost 75% of the market by doing this, right? So
Right.
I believe there is a huge scope to disrupt the instant coffee market by bringing in better quality coffee, specialty coffee in the D2C side of things, and
Mm-hmm.
did what instant coffee did to ground or filter coffee. Slowly, I feel like people will, as the income increases,
Do
they
you
will.
though? Do you though? Because I see that the CAGR has not changed a bit.
That's what I'm
I feel
saying.
like
That's what
Indian
I'm saying.
consumers are very stubborn. I
No,
don't think that it's going to change a lot.
that's what I'm saying. That domestic consumption will not increase, right? So domestic consumption, it's all about taking market share from instant coffee or from ground coffee, right?
I think what really matters here is just the fact that discretionary spending has to increase a lot.
Yeah.
Maybe with the new tax incentives for the middle
That
class segment. I don't
I
know,
don't
but
know. Maybe,
possibly
maybe,
more
maybe,
discretionary spending.
maybe,
But
maybe.
that's what's required because otherwise, price sensitive consumers are never going to spend like 400 rupees on a cup of coffee. Like,
On
it's never going to happen.
400 on not a cup of coffee, 400 on like a pack of. We're talking about D2C brand over here, right? So.
But I'm just talking about generally also,
Ha ha ha.
right?
Sure, for sure, for sure,
That
for sure.
it's difficult to shift them
For
on
sure.
to a premium coffee
For
experience.
sure, for sure, for sure. Yeah. So coming on to the playbook for D2C brand. So we've actually taken this playbook from a bunch of different companies, Sleepy Owl, Rage, and all of these companies have managed to build decent brands in India, right? So there are three things which actually stood out. The first was product innovation and differentiation. So, as I said, the idea is to create a convenient way to consume coffee, right? So, for Sleepy Owl, that was bringing nostalgia back into coffee with the launch of their
Hmm.
cold coffee, right? From 90s.
Right.
So when I was young, I used to have a lot of cold coffee with sugar and all of those things. And their aim was to just bring that back. Similarly,
Hmm.
um, as you said, that there are a lot of consumers who find black coffee to be too bitter or acidic, right? But that's
Right.
why they brought in cold brew, which is smoother and relatively less acidic, right? And third thing that they did to differentiate themselves was to bring in flavored coffee. I am personally not a big proponent of flavored coffee, to be very honest, because I don't understand like how can you add vanilla in your coffee beans. I don't get it, but there is obviously a market for that, right? And fourth is that obviously they launched their hot and cold brewed coffee in a bag and box format. So what that means is that
Hmm.
like a tea, like you have tea sachets and all of those tea
Yeah.
bags, right?
Yeah.
So similarly, you can just put that bag inside coffee, put water, and keep it inside your fridge for a period of time, and then you get a good hot
Yeah.
cup of coffee at the end of it. I think another thing which is changing is that these consumers that we just spoke about, urban consumers, are moving towards a healthier life, right?
Hmm.
So, so what Blue Tokai and all of these people have done is that they've launched clean label products which don't have preservatives, which don't have stabilizers,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? The second thing is the communication of their brand, right? So because coffee consumption in India is relatively low, right? And whenever you bring in any kind of an innovation in this market, you need to inform the consumers about how are they even how are they even supposed to consume this product, right? So what Sleepy Owl has done really well is that for their cold brew packs, they have made videos on how to use
Hmm.
this product so that consumers have the right experience, right?
Hmm.
And finally, coming on to the distribution strategy. So the online consumption in India is not really ideal, right? And you need to expand to various channels. So you have to adopt an omni-channel strategy over here. And by omni-channel, what I mean is that you need to sell through your own website, sell through marketplaces, sell through
Right.
hotels, restaurants, cafes, institution, modern trade, general trade, and most importantly right now, quick commerce, right? So in order to sort of m- bring in consumers onto their side and help consumers consume their product more, like Third Wave, they have loyalty programs for Sleepy Owl as well. So they have the subscription model where they make it easier for you to consume their coffee. I don't know if it's working a lot because people are moving towards quick commerce and they don't mind paying a premium. But yeah, I mean, this is something
Yeah.
that someone could try.
And that's a wrap on today's episode. If you've liked the episode so far, make sure you like and subscribe to our podcast. And we also run a community where we discuss a lot of different things, from marketing, product, and growth. You'll get a bunch of daily insights from me and Rakshit on different happenings in the macroeconomic space, as well as any new trending news from marketing, products, different startups, etc. So all this will be there on this group. You can join the link that's going to be there in the description box. It's a free to join group. So hopefully we'll see you there. And that's it. That's a wrap. Take care. Have a good day.